our hearts are turned to red roses, balloons, teddy bears and so forth to depict the love that we have for our loved ones. But I would like to tell you about a love that transcends all those commercialized things, a love that has endured for 17 years, the love of a mother for a very fragile child. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you today a friend and the mother of one of my transplant patients, Renee Holdridge. Renee, we met 17 years ago. We were up at Holdercrooks Park. I was swinging my little toddler, Brandon.
And I was swinging my little boy, Brandon. So when Janette said Brandon to her little boy, said his name, I said, oh, that's my son's name. And we started to talk about why I was here. And I don't live in this area. We live by the Los Angeles airport. I have two other children, and we were all at the park together because our little boy, Stephen, this is his picture here, was waiting for a heart transplant. And we came every day to visit him. And this was a Sunday. And my husband and I needed to find something inexpensive to do to entertain the children while we took turns visiting Stephen.
So we were up at the park, and you told me your story. Tell me about when you first got the devastating news that Stephen was a sick little boy.
Stephen was born October 2nd, 1991. He was an 8.5-pound beautiful baby. He sounded a little wet when he was breathing, but we thought everything was fine. He was such a big, beautiful, full-term baby. And at 3 hours after he was born, they came in to give him a bath, and he turned completely gray. And the nurse put the stethoscope up and just snatched the baby up and ran. And why would she do that? What's wrong? 14 hours later, I'd been up for 2 days without any sleep and just given birth, and 5 doctors came in to tell me that it was fatal heart disease. Even though he was full term, Stephen had half of a heart. It's called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And it was very bad. And I immediately, they asked if I needed a sedative. You need some rest. You've been up for 2 days. And I said, no, I'm just going to pray. I'm just going to pray. And somehow, I graduated from UCLA, and there's a career center, and there's a huge board. It's probably 10 feet, 8 to 10 feet high. And there are very high esteemed jobs at the top, and the very low menial jobs are at the bottom. You take a card, and you go and try to get that job. And in my mind, in that night, looking at the lights of the peninsula where we gave birth to Stephen in South Bay near Palos Verdes, California, I imagined the Lord lifting me up to that job board and just saying, I'm picking you to take the biggest job of your life, to be the mommy of a very, very sick baby. And I'm a kindergarten teacher. I thought, how can I do this? I don't know anything medical. I don't know how to do any of this. And I just said, okay, Lord. And somehow the grace of God came upon me to not be afraid. Take it on. Take a day at a time and put your baby in God's hands.
And it wasn't easy when you went home. There was many, many challenges that you had to face, right?
Well, evidently a lot of children born with heart defects often have midline deformities all the way down. He's very cute on the outside, but inside, Stephen, as he grew, more midline deformities showed up. He had a very weak digestive system. Everything was malrotated. His lungs were weak. His trachea was floppy. It's called tracheomalacia. Sinuses, his face. He had a tracheostomy later on. He wasn't growing. On his second birthday, he weighed 10 pounds. He wasn't growing. And we finally put a G-tube in. I had to really become like a little nurse, a real doctor at home. And I had 2 other kids to keep happy. And we just made a commitment to God that we were going to take him everywhere with us. We had him in a double stroller. Stephen was in the front. The medical equipment was in the back. Oxygen tubes, sterile suction machines. And I just said, Lord, we're going to do what we can to give this baby a good life. We went to baseball games and soccer games. Even though I showed up late, I was there because I was afraid that Sarah and Brandon, my other 2 children, would resent him and feel like their life had to take a turn for the worse because of their brother. But no, they found out about faith and love and God's determination in our hearts to give us the grace to go on.
During this time, for 10 years you stayed at home with Steve, and then at 10 years of age, you started working again. But there was a greater blessing out of that working because of your other children.
Yes, by the year 2000, 2001, I went back to work, and the other 2 children were older. Sarah was 5 when Stephen was born, and Brandon was 2. Brandon's little friend Brandon, right? And by then they were older, and they had to take on a lot of responsibility if I was going to go back to work. Stephen came home on a special education bus with a nurse. And when they were greeted at our house, maybe I wasn't there, Brandon or Sarah had to take on the time until I could get home. And they still speak very fondly of that time that they got to really know their little brother and play with him and wrestle with him and
Be responsible
take him for rides. Yeah, and they really just feel like the Lord blessed them with a lot of responsibility at a very young age. But we prayed every day that the Lord would give us the sustenance to do this.
About 6 years ago, Stephen
did get very, very sick. When the doctors in Los Angeles sign off that they can't handle it, our insurance would cover the trip to Loma Linda. And he had PTLD, say what that is?
Post-transplant lymphoproliferative disease.
Right, with a suppressed immune system, it's scary that you have this in your future possibly with a transplant, that you may get lymphoma. And at 12 years old, Stephen did get lymphoma. His kidneys were hurt by the medication, so rather than do chemotherapy to fight the lymphoma, they said, "We're sorry, there's nothing we can do. You're going to probably die of kidney failure. He's going to die in 2 weeks." We were sent home with hospice care, 2003. My children were told all about death and what to expect, and he would die at home because we didn't want to die in the hospital. We just said, we've always put him in God's hands. We want our little guy to come home and be in his house with his doggie and his family. And Stephen didn't die. He got better. They took him off all immunosuppression because why would you stay on immunosuppression? You're going to die of kidney failure. And his little immune system that he was born with didn't reject the heart, but it fought the cancer. And it was a huge blessing to my family because my kids were still young. One was in middle school, one was in high school. Their faith was strong, but the Lord knew the timing wasn't right. And Stephen got better.
Right. Stephen was then affectionately known in our office as Stevie Wonder. And he did recover from that, and life went on until this last summer. I was asked by Donna Hadley to write an article for Morning Rounds. If you haven't got one of these books, you can buy it in the campus bookstore. I'm just giving a little plug for that book. But it's got wonderful, inspiring stories in it. Donna asked me to write something. A few minutes later, I called back and said, "Donna, I have another story, and another story from two of my parents." And I asked Renee to write something, and Christy, who's in the audience too, to write a story. And at the very end of that passage you wrote, Renee, you wrote, "We thank the many medical professionals who have counselled us, prayed with us, and helped our son's light continue to shine, whether it be here on earth or from above." Renee wrote that not knowing what the future would hold. And during the summer, Stephen got worse, didn't he?
Yeah, he had a rejection of his heart at 17 years old. We weren't expecting that. And so they had to give him so much more immunosuppression to protect the heart. And the heart was battling all summer. And he was just getting sicker and sicker. And he wasn't making red blood cells. And he was just weak. And he wanted to sleep all day. So we got admitted in November. And the day after Thanksgiving, Stephen had a heart attack and died like that. And it ended up being a blessing. We were so grateful that Stephen died quickly. He never did have to fight cancer with chemotherapy. The autopsy did show that PTLD, the lymphoma, had come back. And I feel like the Lord took him at a time when Sarah and Brandon, who are now 18, Brandon is 18 and Sarah's 22, they were willing and ready to say goodbye.
Yes. And this picture